Today, I'm joined by another founder who was named top 30 under 30 by Marketing Magazine, Young Entrepreneur of the Year by Desjardins Bank, and Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year by the Toronto Board of Trade. He started his career doing brand management marketing at Johnson & Johnson and co-founded Five Crowd that later got acquired and now has founded another company called Shelfgram that gives brands and retailers more in-store visibility to find actionable shopper insights. His name is Bram Warshafsky. Bram, it's a pleasure to have you on our show here today on Off the Record.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to chat.
Cool. Very much looking forward to this conversation from the time that we connected last time. You have a lot of interesting stories and insights to share, so really excited to get to them with you today and share it with our audience.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you had Rachel on as well, right? My co-founder. So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah, we got the duo now.
Yeah.
Bram, first question I have, or the first thing I want to ask you is that you had, I think, three, I believe, pack it in moments in your startup journey when you were kind of like at that point you were ready to quit. Was it one, two, three? And can you tell me about what they were?
Yeah, two for sure. Maybe like a soft third one. But yeah, like, every company kind of has the like it's over moments. And, what we found is basically the only thing that gets you through it is just like raw passion, because when you're crying alone at night in the shower and you're worried about making payroll, there's really not much that, it's going to console you. The other thing is like, it's probably pretty easy for a lot of entrepreneurs to kind of get back in the industry and just interview and get a great stable job. And, once you give up that like paycheck every 2 weeks, you start to realize, that it's very real. So yeah, we had a couple of those moments. One of them was when we were working with a pretty large company here in Canada, and they were a subsidiary of a multinational. And somebody in the US decided to change strategies. And even though our champion here loved our service and everything was great, they had kind of given us the heads up that probably they were going to have to stop working with us because someone they didn't know in another country kind of made a decision. And it's things like that where, sometimes there's just stuff kind of outside of your control, and all you can really do is just adapt and kind of keep going and try to find that founder magic you've got and, make something happen. So now when I meet other entrepreneurs, especially in the early stages, I almost like don't even care what the idea is or what traction they've got. I just care about the passion, because irrespective of what happens on the journey, you're going to hit those moments. And to me, that's kind of the only thing that gets you through it. You got to be willing to like dedicate a decade of your life to solving a problem.
Oh, for sure. That's one thing that's been coming up a lot with all the interviews I've done with entrepreneurs, that a startup journey, you got to commit to like 8 to 10 years, like start to end, like exit wise. And that's like
totally
a commitment that you're making, right, to yourself and to the people around you.
Yeah.
I had a question actually. We've been also on the, stick end, I guess is the expression, whatever it is, of like change management experiences.
Yeah.
Where we were working with somebody and then a new CEO came and brought his own crew in or whatever. Like he had his own idea and his own process and just did a kind of clean slate swap.
Mm-hmm.
From that experience specifically, and I know you probably have another one you want to talk about as well, in terms of those packet in moments, but in that specific example, what would you recommend to entrepreneurs now from that experience you went through in terms of how to combat that or try to maybe like prevent something like that from happening in the event of change management?
Well, I don't really think it's something you can try to prevent so much as it's out of your control. I would joke with, Rachel, my co-founder, all the time that dealing with enterprise companies, it's kind of like, walking from, a couple blocks. And by the time you get downstairs to get out of wherever you are, the person's like left the company, changed roles, on vacation, doing their MBA, got pregnant, boss change. It's brutal dealing with, big companies and change management for sure. I think you just have to kind of go with the flow and find the silver lining. For example, if you've got a passionate client and all of a sudden they're managed out of their business and they go somewhere else, they're not going to forget what happened at the last company, and probably they're going to stay within the industry. And that's a new opportunity. That's a new sales lead that you've just got, right? So I think early on in the entrepreneurial journey, all of those things are hurting you. And then later on, they start to drive organic growth in your business, which is interesting. The other thing is, if you want to manage it, you have to have multiple stakeholders within your customer. Otherwise, you're sort of exposed to like a concentration risk with your customers. So what we always found is we needed a junior champion, somebody who's like fighting the fight for us, an internal salesperson. We needed procurement aligned because they're the one that would, cut the purchase order. And then we just needed some sort of senior stakeholder, and all they'd have to do is meet with us once a year and just say like, this is an okay thing, like, please move forward. And we can operate under that purview. And we were able to basically assess the account health of any one of our customers on whether or not we had those three pillars in place. And if one of them wasn't there, the account success plan was, okay, we got to, level up our junior champion, something like that. So I think to an extent, you can manage it, you can't prevent it, but it's not as bad as it sounds, because that actually is something that drove like huge growth in our business. Most of our customers started to come from just industry turnover.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, like people just go to new companies and then they'd be like, you start a new company, you're looking for early wins. You want to prove you're like a, first 90 days, like, right? So if you had a couple wins from the last company and they were supplier enabled, you're going to reach out to those suppliers. For the same reason that when that CEO came in, they're doing change management and, potentially cutting an existing supplier.
Very true.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that was one example, I think, if I'm not mistaken. What was like the second one?
The second one, that one was really bad because I was also like real sick at the time. And, I was probably working too hard and my immune system was shot. And, Rachel called me and she's like, hey, it's happened. Like, we've lost a customer. And they were about 30% of our revenue. And it just felt like, you feel it physically. It was like a kick in the gut because, there's a human impact once you have employees, right? You feel like you're sort of stewarding them, and it can be really hard because at least I felt like a real sense of like, I need to, help these people grow, and, they're counting on me for their mortgage, things like that. In the end, we actually didn't lose them. We actually thought we were going to lose them as a customer from basically the moment we signed on. And then even when the company was acquired, we were pretty sure we were going to lose them any day. I'm pretty sure they still work with FiveCrowd. So they're just one of those customers, but the lesson that we learned through that, by the way, is that we sold into the wrong part of the organization. And that's an interesting thing. So we closed the deal, but we had sold it into procurement, and we offered a lot of cost savings. So procurement teams loved us. And then when we went to the business, they just were like, okay, like, we don't have any projects for you. Like, why are we paying you guys? So, at some point they decided to kind of cut it, but then they sort of came up with new ideas and new projects. It's actually a funny story on that. We were going to lose them. And the way that we didn't, Rachel and I were sort of talking strategy. And I said to her, I'm like, I have no idea how we're going to keep them, if we're going to keep them, but you got to go to this company's head office. And it's one of those kind of magical moments. She just got an Uber, showed up at the company, walked into the atrium, and started just having lunch with people, like just sitting down, being like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, do you work here? I was like, no, but I just want to introduce myself. Here's what our company does. And she came away with like, 12 projects. So, they were paying our subscription fees for the software, and they weren't making use of it. And, it's ultimately, you just got to like get close to your customers. So we managed to kind of salvage, I think, in both of those like moments. But I sometimes reflect like it could have gone the other way, and we would have just been another statistic of like, 4 to 5 new businesses fail in the first year, whatever those numbers are. It's like pitifully bad, so you got to be a little crazy, I think, to be an entrepreneur. But in those moments, that's really where, the kind of, that's where entrepreneurs are really made, I think.
Exactly. That's where we really shine, I think.
Yeah.
In those two examples, was there one in specific that you walked away with some really kind of practical knowledge or judgment recalibration or as an entrepreneur?
Like just with respect to kind of new learnings or new ways of looking at things. Yeah, I think like something we kind of messed up was cash flow, right? So we had both come from the corporate world where you're managing a big P&L, and for the most part, like we worked at companies like Johnson and Johnson, Coca-Cola, Air Miles, like they don't need to worry about cash flow. So that was never something that we were concerned about. And then our business started growing real fast, and we had to pay freelancers around the world. We had folks in 150 cities we were sending payments to. We had software fees, we had, employees, office expenses, all that. But of course, big companies who are our customers, like they don't pay you right away. It's like 90, sometimes like 120 days. So business is growing, P&L looks great. We should be making money. All of a sudden, there's like no cash in the bank account. And we were two 24-year-olds with basically no assets. So yeah, I think like key learning is like, you've got to manage cash flow. I think I met another entrepreneur once who told me something very sobering, that, revenue is kind of a vanity metric, right? You can have like 500 million in revenue, but still be unprofitable. Like literally someone selling lemonade has a more profitable business, right? Yeah. So, revenue is like vanity. Profit is sanity. Profit's where you start to make sense of things, but cash flow is reality. So you got to manage cash flow. Yeah.
Say that again. He said revenue.
Oh yeah. So revenue is
vanity.
Yeah. Profit's sanity, but cash flow is your reality.
Love that.
Yeah. That one always stuck with me. I'm like, that's just so true. Yeah. I messed up the third part of that sentence.
No, it's, and that's like the one thing I really hope. Well, I think now in the market now, there's more and more companies that are bootstrapping, not going to VCs, so quickly, really building out their business and trying to achieve profitability and cash flow, being cash flow sustainable. And that's how a business should run. Like, there should be more attention to those type of companies than to like those VC ones that probably behind the scenes are just burning cash. And they just, once they get that VC money, it's like basically a drug. They just have to keep injecting it into them until like for top ups,
Yeah, like if you've got growth capital, I think it's good. But my diagnosis of this, because I went to business school, right? So like I was always taught revenue should be higher than costs, and like these are like wild ideas in the startup space. Yeah, I'll talk to people. I'm like, oh, who are your customers? They're like, customers? Like we have investors, we have users. Like why do we need customers, right? And the other like troubling thing is that the word company and the word product have almost become synonymous. And, I'm from a marketing background. I'm like, guys, there's 3 other P's, right? It's like, it's not just about product, but I think what's happened is that the big tech companies have such huge market caps and they're taking advantage of it. It's really hard to innovate. It's much easier to do like an all stock deal and just acquire another product. And so if you're a VC, like you want to fund companies that are going to be bought by a bigger tech company. That's like the fastest path to liquidity and good valuations. It's kind of turtles all the way down. So yeah, I'm bootstrapping, and I definitely think there's like a viable path to like building real businesses.
That's a good segue into my next question I wanted to ask. And you touched upon it already a bit earlier in our conversation. It's about kind of passion. And like at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, I think the only thing that drives you is that passion at the end of the day. It helps you kind of push through those roadblocks, those challenges that are always coming at you left, right, and center. But there are also a lot of moments, obviously, as an entrepreneur where you don't feel passionate and you don't want to keep doing what you're doing. What helped you overcome those specific moments in your journey?
Yeah, what I found is like, for the most part, I'm pretty fired up about what I'm working on, right? And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do that because, I hear from friends who don't love their jobs, and it's like, I just, that's hard. It's real hard. I think what I've sort of shifted in those moments is to stop working on things based on business importance or urgency, and to just shift to working on the parts of the business that I'm passionate about, that get me excited. And like, it's probably not the best for the business in the short term, but longitudinally, it'll manage your energy levels and kind of remind you why you're excited. The other thing is kind of like corny as it sounds, is just zooming out and reflecting on your vision. That's usually the thing that, is related to the business problem you're solving. So, I sort of find those two things, if you're kind of down and out, just don't do the tedious stuff that kind of needs to get done, or even the things that are business important. Just reevaluate your task list and prioritize it based on just the stuff you kind of want to work on, at least for a little bit. That's kind of what's always worked for me. The other thing is having a co-founder is awesome, right? Because like probably they're not experiencing the same lows, at least at the same time as you. And that was surprising for me. I found that my lows were usually pretty lonely because I didn't really want to talk with my family or my friends. You know, they'd be like worried, like, "Hey, is Bram okay?" Like, I don't know, right? Called me crying, like shit like that. At the same time, it's also pretty lonely when you do well. Like, you know, I'd close like the biggest sale of the company and I'd be in such a high, right? Like I've never done hard drugs, but I imagine it's like kind of the same.
Yeah.
And yeah, but like
is.
I also couldn't really talk with my friends and family because you just come across as like a cocky jerk, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody wants to hear about that. But having a co-founder is amazing because they understand the blood, sweat, and tears that's gone into all the sweat equity, and you can privately either celebrate with them or call them, you know, and you just sort of even each other out. I think, especially for first-time founders, that's why I've seen some stats that you're way more likely to succeed with a co-founder.
Yeah,
that might be the best bet. Yeah,
that's a great point. Like, with Entrepreneurs Fund, where Rachel's at, their recommendation is to have only 2 co-founders, ideally. What's your perspective on that? You think 2 is like your only option as a startup team, or do you think they could work out with 3 or 4 co-founders?
Yeah, you know, it's I think a lot of this stuff is situational, and that's the hard thing. You know, I sometimes joke around, like people will tell you with total confidence, like you got to bootstrap, and then other people are like raise money or you know, like never hire your friends. No, you should definitely hire your friends. Like always have a contract. Yeah, like don't worry about it. It's like these are not just like conflicting pieces of advice. They're like mutually exclusive. So I think everything's situational. There's a lot of nuance. It's why I've tried to kind of stay away from, you know, even just telling folks what to do. I think just sort of sharing case studies and stories, and then you can decide if that resonates with your own situation. But I've seen a couple companies that have done really well with like 3, sometimes even 4 co-founders. Personally, though, like my conviction is, especially for first-time founders, you don't just want to do it solo because so much of it is the mental game and it's like real hard. So having a co-founder, especially for your first time, is like totally worth it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I wanted to also bring up something that I read recently to something you just mentioned. Andrew D'Souza, who's the CEO of Clearco, said, as a CEO, his job is to always assess what his team members are passionate and want to work on versus the stuff that they don't want to work on. And he mentioned in his like LinkedIn post this analogy of like, which I don't know if it's pleasant or not, but he said it's real in the sense that other people's garbage are other people's treasure and vice versa. So like some people really would love doing certain things that other people don't. Did you ever come across anything like this, you know, through building up the teams?
Yeah, totally. It's an interesting balance, right? Because, you know, you can't just tell people like, do whatever you want, right? It's not a good way to manage a business, but you do want people to be invested in it and have agency over what they're working on. So the way that we did it is we would actually create our annual and then quarterly goals for the business. And then we would ask everyone on the team to sort of submit a proposal on which goals they wanted to work on and kind of how they wanted to work on it. And then it was kind of a meeting of the minds, but in most cases, we just accepted it and we're like, that sounds like a good plan, go for it. And the ROI on that is sort of, it's a little abstract because what we've sort of found is some things don't manifest very clearly on a profit and loss statement, but that doesn't mean that it's not real ROI. So classic example is like getting everybody hoodies, right? That would show up as just a cost on the P&L. Like, where's the upside? But the upside is that there's less turnover. You know, someone's willing to take a client call at 6 p.m., things like that, right?
Exactly.
We've had employees that would be a little late to an internal meeting and they'd come in and they'd say, hey, sorry, I was just circling the block trying to find the cheapest parking before I expensed it. And it's like, wow, like that's such a sense of ownership, like amazing. Like, how did we do that? Right. But the way you do it is by letting people work on the parts of the business that they find passionate. So I think as a leader, you do need to provide some guidance, but then within that, like you need to tell people where you're going and sort of plant that flagpole. How they get there is really something that the team should be involved in.
Oh, I like that. I like that example. The person finding parking that's the cheapest to expense. That's brilliant.
I remember that happened. I looked at Rachel. We were like, "Whoa, that's cool." Yeah,
that is
I'm glad we got there. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Next question I have is something you mentioned before when we chatted previously. It's about your 1,000 small pivots approach. Wanted to ask you how you came up with this kind of term and what does it mean?
Yeah, I think it's like, you sort of look at a business and then 5, 6 months from now, you look at the same business and it's radically different, right? New business model, maybe new team, sometimes even like a new name, right? And it's easy to sort of conflate evolution with revolution. So I think that this pivot thing has almost been like hijacked into like, okay, that business didn't work. Let's just do a different business. We still have some cash in the bank, like may as well, right? That's not a pivot. To pivot, you need like one foot on the ground and then you kind of move the other one. What our experience was with Five Crowd is that it was just many small pivots. So it was a constant process of validation and learning. And then, we kept on adjusting and we would sort of, meet an advisor or something and then connect with them again. And I remember constantly being a little surprised at their reaction that our business was totally different than it was. To me, it felt like, no, it's been the same. But it's like anything that's like small incremental changes, whether it's, growing up and then you look at a picture of yourself, you're like, man, I was so young back then, right? Or really like, anything where there's incremental change. So, that's what I advocate for. And, I think the typical startup journey, right, is very different than how I've gone about building companies. So, typically, I guess you get a deck and an idea, and that's great because you can get some seed money from friends and family, and that's awesome. You'll get a new incubator, you'll get an MVP, that'll get you a new accelerator. You get a couple of smart people on your board of advisors with all that pedigree, and then it's like maybe one day you get a customer, right? And what we've always done is just day one, like go and get customers, and then they guide you. And so instead of having those big pivots, you end up with many small things as customers provide like constant validation in the process.
I love it. Are you doing that now with your new company, Shelfgram?
Yeah. So, we're working with like a big long list already of the Fortune 500s, companies like Unilever, Church and Dwight, Keurig, L'Oreal. Basically, that's always been my belief is if you just go and get customers, then you don't need to do any of that stuff. Plus, like the crazy thing is they pay you and then you can use that money to build the company. It's just like wild to me that these are, I don't know. Yeah, it's almost like startup comedy sometimes. It feels like
it is. Yeah. Even with our experience working with enterprises, when you really understand like how they operate, like I have one example which kind of blew my mind. It was close to the end of the quarter for them, and they have these budgets. And so, with most companies, budgets can maybe roll over or they have to spend it, right? But this was like 100K remaining balance that some PM or something had in the team, and some team, and they had to use it. So what they did was that they just went and blew it on. I think it was like a big team party, or they used it also to do some courses for everybody, which I thought was a lot better.
Yeah, you see huge training spend in Q4. One of the reasons that like cinema advertising still exists is that it happens to like in Q4. It's a great way to efficiently blow money, especially during the holidays. But because of Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, the services have to be rendered before the end of the year. You can't really like accrue for it. So a great strategy is just look up the target's fiscal year, and in the last month, call them every single day with like a $10,000 project that can be rendered in 24 hours. One of my favorite stories of this, because I was on the other side of this, right? And I was managing a pretty big budget, and depending on the day, I had to like either spend $10,000 or find $10,000 in the budget. And so December 1, this woman called me. December 2, she called. December 3, and on like December 10th, I had to bring my budget down. It's like, okay, what do you want? Now I was working on Johnson's Baby products, and she had created a seal of approval called Parent Tested, Parent Approved. You might have heard of it. Really cool company, and so. She's like, yeah, we can test your brand. And if you get it, you get the seal. I'm like, okay, cool. So we did the test. A few days later, she emails me, hey, congrats. Like, you won it. It's amazing. Here's an invoice for $10,000. I'm like, no problem, paid. And then she emails me a circle that she drew. And done. I was like, that's incredible. Like, I should just have like, best friend approved, like chef approved. Like, I'll just make a book of seals and go to brand people and be like, which one do you want? I got them all. But then the funniest thing happened where the next year we were doing like a $500,000 print ad buy, and we were adapting the creative from the US, and they had a new products award. We couldn't use that in Canada. So I used the seal of approval that I bought, and it actually had her email in, or her website in the seal. So I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, she sold me a circle for like 10 grand, and now I'm spending $500,000 promoting it. Like, what a business.
What a business.
But she didn't even bother calling me like January to, November, right? It's like understanding the fiscal year is like critical. Yeah.
Exactly. Very, very true for enterprises. Their budgets are sometimes out of this control. I'll share one more story. We recently came across with one of our large US enterprise clients. It was a large e-commerce initiative, and they needed to do some data reporting. And I think it's like around Tableau or something like that. But honestly, we scoped it out. It was like 10 or 20 hours worth of real work to do. So they had to go on their vendor approved list, and one of the largest consulting companies in the world, it's a company called Cognizant, was approved to do this kind of stuff. And so they quoted them for the same amount of work, because they were vendor approved, $400,000 US.
Yeah, totally.
And they're like, oh, that's a lot. But then they went and got the budget.
Yeah.
They got the budget a couple days later from nowhere. Like, where did it come from? Where's this money coming from?
Yeah, it's after working within a big company and understanding how it works, it's a huge it's amazing now being on the other side, just to understand that process. But yeah, like I think if you've never worked on the other side of enterprise sales, like doing sales to enterprise is pretty tricky. None of it makes any sense.
Exactly.
But yeah.
I wanted to ask you some other questions about entrepreneurship. I wanted to ask how you probably get advice all the time, good or bad. How do you filter out, or how do you know, and how do you filter out on the bad advice as an entrepreneur? And also, what makes good advice?
It's a good question, right? I think that looking for caveats is pretty interesting, right? Like in the science community, they almost take it to the extreme where you'll see somebody presenting a brand new finding and they're about to win like a Nobel Prize for it. And they open up their talk by discounting all the reasons when their thesis doesn't apply or whatever it is, right? In the business community, for some reason, we do the opposite. It's almost like the MBA way of speaking, where like you must project total confidence in what you believe. And I think it does a disservice to people that are trying to ingest that information. So I just look for words like, maybe, or like you ought to consider, or probably, or things like that. Oftentimes I find that's the best advice, like when, somebody actually really believes in something, but they understand that there are situations where it doesn't work, and they can appreciate that. The space like just reeks of survivorship bias, where someone started a company, maybe got lucky, maybe it's the right timing, and they have one experience, and now all of a sudden, they're the expert. I've never really gone to a conference of like a panel of entrepreneurs that had, mediocre outcomes, but like it'd be interesting to learn from that too, right? So yeah, I think just looking for caveats is probably your best bet.
And why? It's a good thing you brought up. Why do you think it doesn't exist? Why is there no panel of like failed entrepreneurs or mediocre entrepreneurs who maybe tried and failed, but their learnings around those failures probably do
super important? Yeah, totally.
More justice to people.
I feel like in a parallel universe, I'd be on that non-existent panel. If like something had gone the other way. It's interesting, right? We seem to sort of like as a community fetishize either like crazy success where you've hit that unicorn status and you're a name, or we almost fetishize like total failure. It's kind of like the like hustle porn stuff, but now with like failure stuff. And it's like, guys, like failure's not good, right? You should learn from it. And I've spoken at Fuck Up Nights, and I'm a big fan of, what they do. But yeah, that middle ground is where I find most businesses are, right? They've achieved some kind of like modicum of success and they're at an inflection point, and it's like, how do we get to the next level? I feel like the best community around that is sort of like, the like YPO, EO, that kind of thing, where you're surrounded by peers, that group, but that's not super accessible for a lot of people. So yeah, it'd be interesting to, to do that. I think the other thing I was talking with somebody about is like, really love the monk debates. I think that they're really great. And it's like, how come we don't have monk debates for business topics or other things, right?
What is that? I've never heard of monk debates.
Oh, it's really cool. It's like, for like political or social things, they'll get everyone in a room, bring in like the 2 or 3 experts on either side, take kind of a quick pulse of the audience of what they believe going into it, and then do a pulse at the end and see, what changed. But it's a structured format where you've got kind of like an opening monologue, and then there's a moderator, and you can really explore an issue. I feel like even more broadly as a society, we've like lost that ability for civil discourse where, now you're basically either like a snowflake or a Nazi politically. And, even just like with business stuff, people believe things with so much conviction. Everything's polarized now. So I miss this kind of banter that we can have where we just like explore a topic and, maybe I'll actually change my view on it. Like it's, that's, we need more of that.
That's
to
true.
sort of have not just a healthy society, I think, but also a healthy, like, entrepreneurial community.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's that whole like killing it culture that has come up a lot in some of the conversations. Like you're always, showing this kind of fake projection, so to speak, of yourself. But inside you're probably just crying like a little baby because you hate your life and you don't know how to do certain things.
Yeah. But everyone, it's really hard to read people, right? And you get a lot of like scene stars and entrepreneurs, right? Especially at some of these events, and you just have like no idea what's legit and what's not sometimes. Even like taken to the extreme, right? Like right now you've got like Elizabeth Holmes in trial for fraud, but like Adam Newman is kind of like walking away a billionaire. It's like, how did that happen? And it's weird. You can have any kind of outcome, it seems, nowadays, and you can have polarized outcomes on top of the outcomes. So I think this sort of like middle area of like having a real business, growing it, and then trying to get to the next level. I'd love to sort of see more stuff around that. That'd be great.
Hope so. One day, right? We're trying to push for change, doing the show as well.
yeah, totally.
Bram, a couple more questions. One I wanted to ask was around, for a long time, I think you've acted based on that urgency and importance, and you've, I think, touched upon it a bit, but now you kind of prioritize based on what really inspires you. What made you really kind of see that shift from one to the other, like at a foundational level? Any lesson here you could kind of give to other entrepreneurs who are in the middle of maybe that hustle?
Yeah, I think, for me, entrepreneurship is, it's definitely a career, right? It's definitely a job, but more than anything, it's like a way of just expressing myself creatively and, my passions, my beliefs, that sort of thing. I feel like it's somewhere in between how artists express themselves and how athletes express themselves. Like if you're an elite athlete, it's not just a job, right? It's like, what kind of breakfast you eat in the morning, what time you wake up, right? And if you're an artist, it's like, again, it's not just a career. It's finding inspiration and structuring your weekends, all that kind of stuff. So I think, getting in touch with that inner passion is key, sort of for that reason. So just sort of like reflecting on what entrepreneurship means to me. And the other thing is, I'm pretty fortunate because, after Rachel and I, had our company acquired, it offered us a certain element of like financial freedom. But with that, I sort of had to confront all this. I had to confront all the bullshit in my life. She sort of took off to Southeast Asia and was vagabonding on beaches for a year. And I thought I wanted to do that. And then, the acquisition happened and I was like, oh no, that's all BS. Like, I actually just want to work really hard again and start another company. Like, that's all I want to do right now. So,
interesting.
It's, I feel like it's sort of cliche, but it was unexpected for me at the time. I used to tell myself kind of those like only ifs, right? Like if only I could do this, I'd love to do that. And then you sort of find yourself at that crossroads and you realize that it's like everyone who said it was about the journey is actually right. So the best advice any entrepreneur actually ever gave me, my buddy Rob, he said, take lots of pictures. And I half listened to him. I should have taken more pictures, because now, looking back, there were so many moments, but it was kind of all a blur, right? We were just moving so fast. I always wish I had more photos.
Interesting. Take more pictures of what though? Of like what you were going through, the people.
Yeah, like
you.
Anytime you find yourself in a weird situation, take a selfie, right? Whether like you're down and out. Rachel and I, anytime we were like real down and out, we'd end up going for pizza, and we'd just be mopey, and we would take a selfie. At one point in time, I wanted to get to know our freelancers, so I flew around the world. We had a lot of credit card points because we were paying them with credit cards online. So I ended up using that to go to like India and Croatia. And when I was in Florida, I was just crash on the couch with these like freelancers and run groceries with them. And I ended up babysitting her like 6-year-old kid. And then I had to carry him across the road to the neighbors, but he was passed out and he was like slung over my shoulder. And I'm in like remote, Pensacola, and got this 7-year-old that I just met over, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And that's,
that's awesome.
That's like, but that's where entrepreneurship takes you. And so that's what I mean by take photos. You want to remember those like weird moments. Yeah.
Love it. We'll definitely capture that excerpt. I think it's gold. Last question for you, Bram, and then we'll wrap up. It's kind of my bonus round question. We've spoken about productivity, things to do. If you were to try to accomplish your next kind of 10-year goals in the next 6 months, and if you had like a gun against your head, what would you do?
Yeah, I feel like you should sort of only ever business plan as long as you've been in business. If that makes sense. So like if you've been in business a day, it's like, okay, what am I doing tomorrow? A week? What am I doing next week? A month? Right? With Shelfgram, I've been in business now for like a year and a half. So in terms of goal setting, I'm really only looking at, okay, well, what's the next year going to look like? Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll reach back out and let you know at like the 5-year mark or something like that, or the 10-year mark. But I don't really think much further out than that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I find it ends up being sort of like false precision, because if you were to ask me 10 years ago where I'd want to be now, I'd have like never come up with that, even if I wrote it in pencil and kept erasing it. I just like I have no idea where I'll be in 10 years. But I've got a pretty good sense of where I want to be, a year and a half from now.
That's interesting. I never thought of that kind of parallel. If you've been in business for a year, think about 1 year, 5 years, and that relationship. Cool. Smart.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like a good kind of rule.
It is. Yeah. It is very good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah.
Bram, thank you so much for coming on our show today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our dear listeners for tuning in always and supporting the show and following us on LinkedIn. We never take it for granted. So we will have more cool guests coming our way soon.